What is middleware? Middleware is just one or more functions that are placed in the path of requests that are received by our backend API. Middleware can add additional functionality to our backend REST API. Middleware can also apply some preliminary processing to requests before they get to the controller where the request processing will be completed. We'll be adding three types of middleware today: built-in middleware, custom middleware, and third-party middleware. Let's start today with a couple of quick corrections. I'm on the nodejs.org site. In the first tutorial, I said the latest version of Node to use, and really what it stands for, LTS, stands for long-term support. I had latest on the brain from installing the latest packages, but I just wanted to highlight that as I've been asked about that a couple of times. Also, in the code from lesson 1, which is our starter code, by the way, for lesson 2, just always go back one previous lesson, and that completed code will be the starter for the next. I just wanted to highlight that in path join, as you see that I'm using right here, path.join, you do not have to use a slash. And notice I didn't do that when I talked about the views directory here, but I did it with public here. So I was just a little inconsistent. You can remove that if you want to. And if you see me using a slash some other time inside of path.join, well, that just means I'm not really thinking about it. It won't hurt either way, but you do not have to use it, and I will try to stay consistent. Okay, with those corrections out of the way, let's get started by talking about middleware. And again, we're in that starter code, which is the completed code from lesson 1 already. So we already have our server set up. And now we're going to add middleware. And we've already added one piece of middleware that we really didn't discuss, and that was built-in middleware. Express.static is middleware, and it's telling our server where to grab static files. And I was explicit here when I put this in. We put in the app.use, and then we said slash, and then we have express.static, and I used path join to get the directory name, which is this global variable, and then I said in the public folder, which we created over here. You might see this used without quite so much explicit information, which you can also do. So I'm going to show you that right now. You might see it without the slash here, and you might see it without the path join. So it might just be like this, and then I can remove one of those parentheses, I believe. And this would still work because it's relative to where your server file is, or your index.js if you didn't rename it to server.js like I did. But public is relative, so it can find the public file right here, and this will work if you want to do that. I like to leave mine with a little bit more explicit information like you see right here, and like I did in the first tutorial. So I wanted to highlight that. We've already added one piece of built-in middleware, but now we can add some more. And the other one that we need is the ability to process JSON in our application. So we're going to say app.use, then we're going to have express, two S's, .json, and we need to call that. And that will let our app receive and parse that JSON data, and that's what we expect to use. Now with that complete, you can see how easy it is to add built-in middleware to your application. But now we need to go ahead and create some custom middleware. So I'm going to create another folder, and let's first, well, I'm going to create two folders. Let's first create the logs folder, because a server needs to be able to log some things, errors, possibly requests, and whatever we want to log. So we'll have that logs folder. We're also going to create, not inside the logs folder though, so I need to make sure I'm out of that. Let's create a middleware folder as well. And then while I'm thinking of it, inside our gitignore file, let's add the logs directory, because we don't want to send those logs up to GitHub. They'll be development logs, but even in the future with another repository, the logs wouldn't really help our code base, so they don't need to be sent to the repository at all. So I'll include that in the gitignore. That said, let's go to the package JSON file. I'm going to change the name here to lesson 2, but now we need to add some dependencies that we're going to use as we write some custom middleware. So I'm going to press Control and the backtick. Then I'm going to type npmi and date-fns and also UUID. So two separate packages, and we can add them on the same line like that. And they will install shortly, and when they are finished, we should see them listed in our dependencies. And now we do. So we have date-fns, we already had express, and now we also have UUID. And now inside our middleware directory, let's create a new file, and I'll name this logger.js. At the top of logger, we need to destructure. So I'm going to destructure format, and I'm getting that from our date-fns dependency that we just required. After that, I'm going to do one other destructure here, and this is going to be v4, and I'm going to rename it UUID, and that's going to be coming from UUID. But I know that looks a little weird, but that is, at least the last I looked, that is what they were currently recommending. So we're getting v4 when we destructure, and then we're renaming it UUID. After that, I need the FS module for the file system, so that comes directly from Node. It's already built in, so we'll have require FS. Now I'm going to do Shift Alt and the down arrow, but I'm not going to leave it the same. This needs to be FS promises, and at the end of our require, we also need to put dot promises. And then I need that path module again. So const path equals require path. Now we have everything imported. Let's start by creating a helper function called log events. And this will equal an async function that receives a message and also a log file name. Now inside this function, I'm going to copy and paste a couple of things I typed earlier just because they are template literals that have several different variables in here, and it's easy for me to create a typo, so I'd rather just go over these with you. I'm creating a date time variable, and I'm using that format function. Notice this is a template literal, and inside this template literal, I've got a new date object, and then I'm formatting it, and this goes from the docs of the date-fns package that you could find at npmjs.com, I believe, is where you could search that up and find those docs, and it will also link to the GitHub repository. But there are different ways you can format the date, and I'm going with year, month, day, and then I've got hour, minute, second. So anytime I'm creating a log message, I'm getting not only the date, but also the time. And then I have a log item here, and for this log item, I'm passing in this date time that we just created. And notice the /t's. Those are tabs, which will make the logs easy to import into Excel or something similar if I wanted to. I'm calling UUID here, which creates a specific ID for each log item, which might be handy as well if we were to export that. And then we have the actual message that is passed in. This last /n creates a new line. So each log item gets its own line in the log file. Okay, let's go ahead and create the rest of this function now. So we've got a try, and here we're going to check if the directory exists first. If not, and we try to save there, we'll have an error. So we say not, which is the exclamation mark, then fs.exists sync, and then inside here I'll use path.join, and we'll use the global dir name variable, and then we'll go up out of the folder with two dots, and then we'll look for a logs folder, and we're saying if that doesn't exist, then we'll need to create it. So we'll say await fs promises, and then that's .mkdir for make directory, and then we'll just need that same directory that we were looking for. If it doesn't exist, that's what we're creating. So I'm just going to copy that and paste it right in there. So now we have either created the directory or it already existed. And now let's say await fs promises, and we'll append file because we are appending to our log file or creating that log file as well if it doesn't exist, which is what will happen here. This is once again that same path. So I'm going to paste it in again, but we're not finished after that. I need a comma after logs, and I need to say the log file name, and then we can have the parentheses, and then we need to specify our log item. I'm going to press Alt-Z because that's a longer line, so now we can see it wrapped down. So here's the append file. We provide the path. Oh, I've got two path joins. That's why it got a little longer. Let's go ahead and remove that. So now we provide the path, the directory name, 2 dots to go up out, logs, so we're in that logs directory, then the file name itself, and then the item to log to the file. Now after this, we'll just put the catch here, and I'm catching an error, and right now I'm just going to say console.log error. Now I'm going to scroll up and we'll write the actual middleware here. So const logger. Middleware has a request, a response, and the ability to call next, so it can move on to the next piece of middleware. And here we'll put in log events, and actually I'm going to copy this as well. I am just too susceptible to typos when it comes to those template literals with several values. So let's look at this log events, which is what we just created above, and we're passing in this template literal here that has the request method, a tab, the request URL, another tab, there should be tabs between all, and then the origin, what the URL, where the request originated from, and we're writing that all to the request log.log, which is like a text file, but that's the convention for writing logs, and you can open it like a text file as well. So this would log every request that comes in. You might want to put some conditionals in there that would say, okay, only log it if it's not coming from our own URL or something like that, or only specific request methods, because this would get full very fast if you left it like this for your entire application. But I'll leave it there and leave that part up to you. Now we'll say console.log, and here I think I can manage to type in this template literal. It'll just have the request method, after that a space, and the request .path. We'll see that in the log of Node.js here as we're running our server, and that could help us during development. After that, we just want to call next. So it moves on to the next piece of middleware, or eventually the controller where the request would be processed. The logger, of course, would come first before those other things. And now let's add the module.exports, set that equal to, we want to export both of these because we might use log events inside of an error handler as well. Now let's go back to the server.js file, and we can import the logger we created. So we'll say const, we'll get the logger, and that comes from our require. We'll look in our middleware folder we created, and there should be the logger. There it is. Now we really want this logger to come before everything else. So we'll say app use logger, and we should be able to save that. I'm going to press Control and backtick to get our terminal open, and then I'm going to type npm run dev to get our server up and running. It should start on port 3500, and you can see we're using NodeMon, so as we make any changes, it should go ahead and restart, and it will give us this message. This is our console for Node.js. I'll drag this to the left, and we'll go to the browser. We've got our localhost 3500 where we should at least get our home page when we put in a request, and we do, and we can now see the requests log here in the console. So we had 2 requests come in, both GET requests, one for that root route and the other for this static file that we specified that was available in the public folder. So both of those were logged, and now we should have a request log inside of our logs directory as well. I'll drag this over, and we can see how this was logged. We have the date, the time, the specific ID of the request, and the request, and then the origin is undefined as we're here in our local development environment. Now we're ready to add one more piece of custom middleware. So let's create another new file inside of the middleware directory, and we'll call this error handler.js. I'm going to close the terminal just so we don't have to look at that right now. And we'll start out by importing in that helper function that we created called log events. So that will equal require, and we're in the same directory, so it should just come from logger. From there, we can create our error handler, and this is going to overwrite the default express error handling. And we can do that just by creating this middleware that starts with an error, and then it also has the request, response, and next. And now inside of this function, this middleware, I am going to once again paste in a line that's just a little bit difficult for me to type without typos, and we'll go over this, but we're calling that log events function, and it's a big template literal here. I'm including the error name and message, and then there's a tab, and then it's just like the previous log events that we were logging. So it has the request method, the URL, the origin, and this is going to the error log file, so errorlog.log. Otherwise, basically the same. I'm also going to put console.log and log the error.stack. This will be a pretty large message inside of our console, several lines worth, but it will give us a lot of details about an error and tell it specifically where it is, which is always helpful. Then I'm going to define a status, and this is going to look to see if the response we receive up here as one of the parameters already has a status code set, and this is a ternary. So if it does have that status code set, then we'll just return that status code. If not, it's going to be a 500, which is a server error. And then we'll set the status to whatever our ternary determined, and then we'll have a response that is JSON data, and we'll say message, and then we'll have the error.message. Let's not forget to do the module exports at the bottom. So we'll say module.exports, set that equal to error handler. And now back in the server.js file, we can import our error handler as well. So we'll say const error handler, and this will come from that middleware folder also. And this is from the error handler file. But now, instead of using it at the top like the logger, we want to use it at the very end, essentially, at least right before we tell our app to start listening. So here we'll say app use, and we'll pass in that error handler right there. Now we will test this out in a moment, but I also want to get started with our third-party middleware now that we've written custom middleware. So let's go to the package.json one more time. Bring up the terminal. I'm going to press Control-C to stop the server temporarily. Type npm I, and I need cookie-parser. Our REST API is going to need to be able to parse cookies, and that's because we're going to use them in this MERN application. We can see we've added the dependency right up here, so I am ready to once again type npm run dev and keep the server running, and it will restart with changes. That's good. Let's go back to the server.js. I'm going to scroll back to the top for the imports. So once we get up to the top, I'm going to import that cookie parser. We'll call this cookie parser in camel case. We'll set this equal to require cookie dash parser. And once we have that, it's just about as easy to apply as our built-in Express JSON middleware. So we'll say app.use, and then we'll say cookie parser, and we call that. And now we'll be able to parse cookies that we receive as well. So that was very easy third-party middleware to add. However, I want to cover something a little more complicated that must be added every time, or at least a consideration every time you create a REST API. So I'm going to drag the code to the left. I am going to go over here to the browser, and we're at google.com. I'll just press enter to pull that up, and then open up DevTools, clear out whatever warnings they have. And what I'm going to do here is type in a fetch right in the console and type in our development REST API, so localhost 3500. And now when I press enter, we get a CORS error, a CORS policy. That stands for cross-origin resource sharing. And it says no access control allow origin header is there. This sends an options request, which is another type of HTTP request, much like a post, a put, a patch, a delete, and so on. And that options did not detect that header. This is really the first line of security also. Google should not be able to request information from our API, another resource at another URL essentially, unless we say it's okay. So we have to enable CORS for that to happen and pass this what is called a pre-flight request. So let's go ahead and do that, and we'll do it as if we were creating a public API first, and then we'll secure it afterwards. So it's very easy to set it up as if it were a public API. So we'll go ahead and control backtick, Control C to stop the server again. We'll type npm I cores, and it should install quickly, and we should be able to see that listed in the package JSON now as a dependency. So that's good. We'll control backtick again and npm run dev to start the dev server back up with nodemon. After we've done that, let's go back to the server.js, and we need to import cores. So we'll say const cores equals require cores. And after we have that, it's just about as easy to apply as these others when we just want everything to be available to the public. We'll say app.use cores, and we call cores. And now if we pull this back over to the left and we go back to Google and we do Control-Shift-I to open up DevTools, we've got our error here from the fetch. Let's try the fetch again and see what happens. We get a promise pending because we're not really processing anything from the fetch and we expect the promise, but there's no error. That's because our API is now essentially available to the public. So those that are at other origins can request resources from our API. Now what we want to do now is secure it, so we only allow the origins that we want to access our API. And we can do that with cores options. So I'm going to control or close the DevTools, drag this back to the right, Visual Studio Code full screen, and we need to create some cores options. We're going to do that by creating first a directory over here called config. And inside of config, we're going to create two files. The first one is allowed origins.js. Here we'll define our allowed origins, set this equal to an array, and now these will just be strings that will say what origins are allowed. And the first one we'll put in just for development will be where our React app will eventually be at and requesting data, and that's usually localhost 3000. After that, I'm making up a couple of fictitious URLs here. I didn't register them. I don't think anybody else has either, but you never know. So I'm just saying https://www.dandyrepairshop.com, because that is our stakeholder for this project, is Dan D and his repair shop. And then we'll also say https:// and we'll just do this without the W's. These are strings that need to match, so you would typically want to do both of these for any URL. So you'd have dandyrepairshop.com as well. These would be the local hosts that we would accept to access our REST API. And now we'll say module.exports equals allowed origins. And now we can use these when we create the cores options in the next file. So we'll create another file, cores options.js. I'll start by importing in the allowed origins that we just created. And it's nice to have those in a separate file if we want to refer to them somewhere else inside of the API as well. So that's why they're in a separate file to begin with. Now we'll say const cores options, and this is going to equal an object. This is, again, third-party middleware, so we have to follow the rules they have set up for their options. And this is like a lookup object where we have the origin method here, and this is going to receive the origin and a callback function. And now inside of this function, we're going to check that allowed origins list, and then we'll say dot index of, and I said list, it's an array. Then we have the origin, and then we'll say if it's not equal to -1. Now this would limit it to where only those in the array, only those origins, would be able to access our backend REST API. But then that would screen out other software like Postman that we might test our API with, or possibly desktop applications or anything else that didn't provide an origin. So you might also want to say or no origin. And this would go ahead and allow Postman and some other things to possibly access our REST API. So here, this is if it's successful. We'll say callback. The first argument that is passed into the callback is an error object. So here we'll just say that's null because we don't have an error. The second is the allowed Boolean, either true or false. And yes, this is successful, so we'll say true. And then here we'll have the else where it fails. And now we'll have a callback, and we'll use that first argument, which is an error. So we'll say new error, and we'll say not allowed by cores. There's also some other options we can set inside of cores. One is credentials, and we'll set that to true. Now this sets the access control allow credentials header. And if you did my Node.js for Beginners course, we actually created separate middleware to set that header, which is kind of taking the long way around, but we learned a little more. Here, you can just set this option to true and it handles that header for you. So that's a great option to go ahead and set to true there. And then say options, success, status, and we'll set this to 200. I believe the default is 204, but there are some devices that have some problems with that, so you might just want to set that to 200. After that, we'll say module.exports, and we'll set that equal to cores options. Now I know I might get asked what devices would have a problem with the 204, but I believe in the documentation it says smart TVs, older browsers, things like that. We probably wouldn't run into it, but just setting it to 200 makes so we will not have any problems. Let's head back to the server.js and go ahead and apply these options now. So we need to import our cores options. So we'll say const cores options, set this equal to require, and then we'll have our config folder, and then we'll have our cores options file. And then for cores options, we just pass them right into cores here. So once we've done that, our cores options are now set up. Let's go ahead and make sure the server's running. And yes, it's on port 3500 and running as expected. I'll drag VS Code over. I'll drag our browser back over and go ahead and open up DevTools once again. Let's go ahead and put in a fetch once again. And now we're blocked by cores as expected. And the reason is we're not allowing Google to access our resources. We're only allowing those URLs that we put in our allowed origins to access our resources at the REST API. So that's as expected. I'll close this. We'll come back to our server and let's see what happened with that error. And we did log the error stack to the console now. So let's look at this. It's fairly large here, but it gives us quite a bit of detail. We got the error not allowed by cores. So we logged the full error stack and then it gave all the other details, which can be quite a bit. But let's look at what else happened. We now have an error log because we had our error handler, and let's look at what was logged in our error log. And now we had our error not allowed by cores there as well, and it came from google.com. Well, that's great. Everything's working as expected. We have added built-in middleware, we have added custom middleware, and we have added third-party middleware. It's added extra features to our REST API, and it will even do a little bit of preliminary processing to those requests that are coming in. So we are well on our way to completing the back end for our MERN stack project.